So I'm Barbara Bishop, and I'm the Director of School Improvement and Professional Learning, and we are providing just some very quick webinars to help bring a lot of resources into one place. We already have such really great, rich resources provided for us from the Department of Education, and in fact, the presentation today uses a number of resources, including the archived Department of Education webinars on the constructed response for Georgia Milestones ELA and Math, and also some West Georgia RESA constructed response training PowerPoints, as well as the external prototype or sample items that have been referred to us from the Department of Education. Everything that I'm showing today or referencing today can be accessed from the link that you see at the bottom here at tinyurl.com/GA Milestones ELA. And upon the end of this presentation today, you will also receive an email with a link to this recording, to this PowerPoint, and that link provided again. So our learning targets for this very brief time is to build our capacity to introduce students to the expectations, the format, and the content of constructed response questions, and for us then to think on a personal level of what it is that we need to do next personally in order to continue our learning in this arena. I have build capacity in bold there because it's really important to recognize that you are great teachers and you already have a wonderful capacity to introduce students to this new format of assessment with the new expectations of constructed response, and that this webinar is just simply trying to build upon what you already have. I want to first reference the Department of Education's Assessment for Learning webinar series. These are rather new, and the state of Georgia has student assessments now, as you know, that include tasks where students are writing explanations and showing their work. And so for that reason, the Department of Education has put together some Assessment for Learning series webinars. Okay, I'm going to stop the PowerPoint for just a moment so I can show you on the main page here that on this West Georgia RESA Georgia Milestone resource site, we have provided a link directly to the DOE's Eliciting Evidence of Student Learning webinars, and you can see that the overview and session 1 for elementary, middle, and high are already provided here, and I hope that you will check them out when you have an opportunity. Also, every webinar that we do over the series of this course of this school year will be recorded and placed here on our on our West Georgia RESA page. So that's where we'll have our recorded webinars. We also have some upcoming courses, a link to the FIT models, and also throughout the DOE's constructed response Georgia Milestone webinars, they have provided many suggested articles that were provided in the last slide of their resources from their PowerPoint. I simply just found them online and put a link to them. So here are some articles that the DOE has suggested that we read. And then over here on the right are those locations for practice items that the DOE have suggested. For example, our own DOE's Formative Item Bank, the PARC and Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium items, the NAEP items, and then a few other of our sister states that have done a nice job of pulling together some resources that are available to us in the public, Delaware, Kentucky, New York, and Louisiana in particular. Okay, so I'm going back now to our PowerPoint. We know also that this is again the Assessment for Learning series from the Department of Education. Okay, so we know that we want to use these items not only as benchmarks to see, oh boy, where are we going to be when we have those summative tests in the spring, but also we want to use them as tools for us as teachers, as formative assessment items. And so the DOE has done a great job of reminding us that we want to use this in an assessment for learning scenario rather than an assessment of learning. So the examples of the resources that I'm sharing here and that the DOE have shared, it is suggested that these be formative items informing the teacher and providing the students with deliberate practice, but not something that would then become a grade, as we want to reserve these items for formative tools. They gave a very great slide that I've just grabbed here, where they reminded us that after the standard has been deconstructed, the teacher wants to assess current knowledge and does so with items like this, and from that creates a lesson and an assessment, teaches that lesson and assessment, and then assesses again, provides feedback, and so on and so on. And y'all know the cycle. So we know that we need to directly teach the accessing of constructed response questions because we now have this as a charge within our assessment system. And you folks have probably seen the numbers. Just as recently as 2013, there was a big disconnect between what our CRCT said and what the NAEP said. And so our Georgia Milestones tests are attempting to bridge that gap. And you probably have heard also that there was a pilot of ELA constructed response items across the state, and that the students did, as you might expect, very poorly. This is not a reflection of their intellect, and probably not a reflection of the teaching they had, but rather a reflection of their complete unfamiliarity with the format of this new kind of assessment. So this is where we begin with the anticipation that most students will not have access to it unless we begin to provide that exposure and that confidence. So one reason why the kids do so poorly on constructed response questions, or the pilot group did, is because the students simply don't know what is being asked. Or they provide an answer that they feel is quick and gets at the heart of it, but what we as adults would recognize as shallow and in need of more details. Students also get off topic. They have a feeling that the more they write, the better they must be doing, and that's not always the case. And students often, because they're nervous about these tests, and for good reason, they often jump in and start talking about whatever they do know, and that's not always what is being asked. But the main thing here is that students are not in the habit of lifting and using answers. And I apologize if that's hard to see right there at the bottom. Students are not in the habit of lifting and using answers. They're in the habit of just simply identifying, choosing, selecting answers. So a little bit from the experts that tell us that constructed response questions are going to require students to apply knowledge, skills, and critical thinking, to have a more real-world, standards-driven performance task, and the students are going to then have to construct without the benefit of suggestions or choices. And we know then that we will have a number of question types on our Georgia milestones, including selected response, constructed response, extended response, and even technology enhanced. And what we're taking a look at quickly in this webinar is the constructed response, where the students are given a prompt that is rather open-ended, and from it they must construct an answer. This is just a slide telling us a little bit about that pilot test from the past. We know also that a big change for us, for Georgia Milestones, is that we are no longer isolating the writing skill or the reading skill, but rather pairing them up as they naturally go, so that there is writing at every grade level, and writing that is from a source. And many of you have heard this really terrific quote, but I want to repeat it because it is so terrific, that reading and writing have got married, and they made a solemn vow, and their wedding vow went like this: I will no longer write without a book on my desk, and I will no longer read without a pen in my hand. And so it's just a funny little way to reinforce that reading is for the purpose of a response in writing, and that writing is an opportunity to respond to a source. This slide also comes from the DOE webinar. I just put it here just to remind us that the rubric for each open-ended constructed response question will have a descriptor, and it will be up to the student to reach this level of detail. And the scores could be 0 through 4, 0 through 3, even 0 through 2. We don't know the actual items and the resulting rubric yet, but we do know that it would be this kind of a holistic response rubric. And my colleague, Dawn Bennett, whom many of you probably know, has come up with a really terrific acronym that I suggest that she suggests that we teach the kids, and that's the acronym RACE, for rewording or restating, answering, citing, and explaining. And so students can practice a RACE process where they're provided with a question, they reword or restate that question, they provide an answer to it, they then look in their text for evidence that supports it, and then explains. So a teacher who can, through the natural course of the class day and also on her formative or his or her formative assessment items, can give students an opportunity to do any of these or all of them at the same time. So for example, here is an organizer. It is a constructed response organizer where the student would be provided with a prompt or question, or come up with their own prompt or question, restate that question in their own words, give the simple answer, and then go look for the evidence and pull those words, and then offer an explanation or concluding thought there at the end. So obviously a graphic organizer will help students. This acronym will help students. We want the students also to just be in the general habit of understanding that questions can be restated and that there's an expected format for that restatement. So for example, even with something as simple as Little Red Riding Hood, the question could be, how did Little Red Riding Hood know the character in the bed was not her grandmother? And then we want to teach students that there are so many different ways to answer that, but the way that you might expect would be Little Red Riding Hood knew because. And so we want students to have the opportunity to have as many interactions, successful interactions with the restatement of prompts as possible. So certainly we don't have time to have students do a constructed response item every single day. But we might have time every day to have a question and then to practice how would you restate that question, and then also what would be an expected format that would come back to you from it. And we also want to teach students that there are some words that are connecting words, and that those connecting words, when used by the writer, can lead them nicely into the rest of a constructed response answer. Words like because, to, by, when, and if, and until. And students can be given those words, either draw them on a card or be assigned them in, as a member of a group, and then write a sentence that would begin with those words. Little Red Riding Hood was not afraid because, ... and what might go there. When was Little Red Riding Hood afraid? What would have happened if, etc. So we want to introduce students to a number of options. And we want the students to actually use a pen or a pencil to annotate their and mark up their prompt, and to turn that prompt into a restatement. So what did you do in the evening when you got home from school becomes, in the evening when I got home from school, I ... What's the wrong way? Rewording the question, restating. Why were the three bears so upset when they came home? Turning that into the three bears were so upset when they came home because. Students can be assigned different roles to do a restatement. You can have someone who is the restatement in an oral format, the one who writes it onto a sentence strip, one who rewrites it onto a chart paper, etc. Here are some other examples. How did Little Red Riding Hood know that her character in the bed was not her grandmother? What would be the expected response from that? how did the wolf fool Little Red Riding Hood? You could have questions like this and have, to differentiate, you could have some students simply match the prompt here with an expected restatement, and then have other students provide from the prompt an expected restatement. And then you could have other students, in fact, provide the restatement and then improve upon it, and maybe even reflect upon why their sentence is more unique or more detailed, etc. So we want students to practice with restating. We want to reinforce the complete sentences, both written and verbally. We want to take opportunities to introduce the prompts themselves, even if there's not time to do the full writing. I like this as a reminder that constructed responses are like construction. And when you construct something, you build with materials. So we can ask the kids, is it possible for you to construct something without materials? And of course, they'll say no. We want to teach them that the materials that they're going to use are little pieces from the text. And I like to like visually illustrate that with scissors. Here is an example from New York's collection of prototype items, again with that link on that main page. This is a third grade excerpt, Science Friction by David Lubar. And you could provide the students with this short text. And I would, just as an example, tell the students, we want to figure out how George behaved, and just put that forth as a question. And then we have the actual short passage. Students could read it together, or they could be or they could read independently. This could be a full group activity with the teacher, but we're using highlighters. We want to highlight the evidence, anything that shows that how George behaved. And then when we actually have those different words and phrases highlighted, we can cut them out, and we can put them on a piece of paper and notice then that they don't make sense, right? You can't just have materials, you have to have materials and glue to construct something. So we talk then about what's the glue, and we talk about connector sentences and connector phrases, and you can do some great differentiation here by having a number of more direct and simple connecting statements for some students, and an expectation that others draw from a different set. But these are some of the words that would be common across constructed responses. Even though the content of the constructed response might be different, the materials might be different, the pieces of the text that a student chose to grab and use might be different, but these are the kind of glue statements that would put it all together. And students then, with the help of some sentence starters and some of these expected transition words or glue words, so to speak, along with their evidence, are putting the paragraph together. I like to back students into the prompt, look at the question without it having its, empty space that stares at you, and then afterwards to say, well, look, guys, look what you just did. We went through this and we found evidence of how George was behaving, and we cut that evidence up and we put it on this paper, and then we added some of our glue words, and so we came up with a little response. But what we actually did was one of these constructed response questions. How does George behave as a member of the group? Use two details from the story to support your response. So I think that students can do the work and then be reminded that they've actually accomplished something along that line. Some of these sites that provide the prototype questions are terrific in that they also provide the student responses. Our own students would probably love to act as teacher and to be given a marker and told, I need for you to look at the student's work, and I need for you to circle the 2 details from the story. And then they can discuss whether or not they do see 2 details from the story and whether or not they agree with those details. You could have students underline the expected words, those glue words from your list. You could have students compare one student response to another, and you want to provide examples so that you can illustrate that it's not just the number of words that a person has provided, but that sometimes what is said in many sentences can be said the same way in fewer words. And the students then can have some experiences, whether they be short tickets out the door or full group-led teacher examinations of these prompts, or for homework be given the prompt without the passage and simply be asked, how would you begin this response? What is the expected restatement? And maybe even for other students, what's an expected restatement and what's an improved restatement? What's a more original restatement that you would use? So I know that this has been way too quick, but you folks have so many things to do. We want to make sure that you have an opportunity to access all of the great resources that the DOE has suggested for us. So I'm going to go back up here to the Milestones Resources page. And again, this when we finish this webinar in a moment, we are going to send out the recording and also this link. All of these links on the right are the item banks that we have been given as a suggestion from the DOE. We do have others, and we will add those as well. The PowerPoint for today will also be housed here, and we can share that. I've had to mute, which I really hated to do, but now I'm happy to unmute. So does anybody have any questions or comments? I know that you guys are already doing terrific things with your students to this end. Does anybody want to share a question or an idea from their own experience? You can also type your question into the question bar. Does anybody have any questions they might want to type in? Okay. We will go ahead then and we'll go ahead and do the recording, let the recording render, and then send out the links to these materials. And I encourage you to contact us with other great resources you have that you might want us to add to our page. But also, you're now on a list where every time we deconstruct a question like this in a webinar setting, we'll send you the link. I hope that this has been in some way helpful. If you have suggestions for other short webinars that might provide you with other examples and other resources, then please just let me know. Okay, thank you all very much.